Welcome back. You're looking at a picture of Havana, Cuba. Fidel Castro, dead at the age of 90. Nothing going on there because the government imposes a 9-day, basically mourning period where basically I think that is just to suppress people from actually coming out and showing their true feelings, which might be more celebratory, as you're seeing here in Miami. And we're very fortunate today to have on the phone with us a Fox News contributor, Mercedes Schlapp. Mercedes, I remember learning, the most I've ever learned about Cuba is really from you, and your personal story and your passion and advocacy for freedom in Cuba is second to none. So I wondered if you could give your thoughts to us this morning.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me on. And of course, I woke up to this shocking news. I have to tell you, for the Cuban community, while they will not be able to go out in their country, believe me, I could expect the streets of Little Havana or Miami coming out and actually celebrating the dictator's death. You know, my father was in jail. He was a political prisoner under Fidel Castro for 6 years. I told him the news this morning. He broke down in tears. These are individuals who, so many, thousands of Cubans, who fled their homeland because they lost everything, because Fidel Castro and the dictator and his regime basically would take their properties, take their businesses, take their homes. Some, like my father, tried to fight back. Of course, they were put into jail. And so it's been a long, painful journey of division amongst families, many who came here but left relatives back in Cuba. And so, although I have to say it won't change much, right? Raul Castro is still there. He has holds a very iron fist on the Cuban people. There's still a lack of freedom in that country. But Fidel Castro represented all that power and that strength for keeping the island under control, under absolute control, where there would be no freedom of press.
Mercedes, if you were to turn the channel this morning, which no one should because we've got the best coverage of this by far, you would see some trying to say there's a mixed picture, right? He's kind of a cult hero. There's some that support Fidel Castro. You understand him. You understand this regime. Paint the picture of what life in Cuba has been like under the Fidel Castro regime.
Well, I think the best way to understand it is that the Cuban society is divided into two. One, which are those who absolutely support Fidel Castro and communism, the military, the intelligentsia community, those who live very fancy lives, those who get the money, those who are able to raise their families in a way where they would be considered middle upper class because of their loyalty to Fidel Castro and to the regime. The second part of Cuba is the one that I think sometimes you don't see enough of because they don't even allow the press to go into these communities. And those are the ones who stay quiet, who they receive food. For example, it's not like you go into a typical grocery store in the United States and go buy whatever you need. They don't have enough money. And when they go, they get rations, right? So they get 1 gallon of milk for a whole month. They get 1 serving of 12 dozen eggs for a whole month. These are individuals who are trying to figure out how they survive on a day-to-day basis. Many of them are associated or live based on the black market. It's a very depressing conditions for these individuals. Why? Because they can't focus on how do we fight back for freedom. They're focusing on how they're going to feed their families. And they have to stay quiet because if you talk, and if there's what they call like the communist patrol in the area, they will ensure, or the police, they will let the upper echelons of the Communist Party know that you're betraying. And there's many of these women, the women in white, damas en blanco, who go out there and they have peaceful protests. Well, guess what? They end up getting beaten up by the police and the military, and it's just that it's a sad scenario, and it's one of the reasons why I think it's important to still talk about this, even though Fidel Castro is gone. This change has not occurred in Cuba, where individuals are just able to live freely.
Well, a remarkable picture you're painting of Cuba, Mercedes, and we appreciate you doing that from such a personal standpoint. Let's talk a little bit about the political, as you set that up perfectly for what should come next. So President Obama has taken executive action. It's been very controversial to some. Others say it's time to bring American capitalism to Cuba and open it up that way and forget about the trade embargo and all of that. And as you know, Donald Trump had a different view in this campaign. He's now inheriting the world, all kinds of thorny national security problems. But in terms of Cuba, what is the way forward, do you think?
Well, absolutely we want to see a change Cuba. Absolutely we want to see the opportunity to trade with Cuba. The problem with President Obama's what we call the weak deal with Cuba is the fact that there were no concessions made from the Cuban government. It was all America opening up relations, having more conversations, exchanges with Cuba, not expecting anything in return. The one thing they expected of return were to free 50 political prisoners. They freed the 50 political prisoners, and several months, by the time President Obama went to visit Cuba, there was over 50 political prisoners who were back in jail. So it really is something where you find a deal where they did not follow through on their promises, but yet we've decided that giving the concessions would help to open trade or to have the conversations with the Cuban government. It needs to be a little more where they're saying, you know what, we are going to work on ensuring that, you know, we have more freedom of the press, freedom for individuals to speak. That's, I think, more of the exchange that we want to see. We want to see the ability for them to create unions. They're not allowed to create unions in Cuba.
Mercy, could I ask you two other questions? Because we have a situation now where there will be a state funeral in Cuba, and we've been asking a couple of guests this morning who and at what level and whether the Obama administration should send to the funeral to represent. And I also wondered if you could finish us off with a discussion about the youth of Miami, or maybe the youth of the country, because you have Colin Kaepernick, the San Francisco 49ers quarterback, you know, basically crying because Fidel Castro is dead. That I believe that the youth, at least in Miami, still understands and has the connections like your father or your grandfathers that actually had to suffer in prison because of Fidel Castro. So what would you say about the funeral and then on the youth and how we educate them?
I think that's a great question on the funeral. Obviously, you know, in nations that we do have relationships with, we do send a group of individuals of the very high-level officials to go to the funeral. I will be incredibly curious to see who President Obama will send. Maybe he himself will go. Maybe he will send his wife or Joe Biden, because of the fact that he has been trying to extend an olive branch to the Castro regime, and also the fact that they reopened the embassy of Cuba, of the United States in Cuba. So I do expect that he will make this last-ditch effort to send high-level representatives, maybe himself or Vice President Biden to go, or Secretary of State Kerry. I believe you will see one of those three figures attend this affair. Now, to that extent, I will tell you it will be a slap on the face to Cuban Americans, especially those from Miami.
Sure.
And for the youth, I think it's incredibly important to recognize that that for Cuba, it is about searching for freedom. Fidel Castro's death will not be the case.
Yeah, no, searching for freedom indeed. We have to wrap it there. Unfortunately, we're up against a hard break.
Thank you, Mercy.